I sent a cruel message to my cheating wife's lover's phone when he was with her at her house, and at the exact moment they were laughing at me together, as if I were a blind idiot, his cell phone vibrated with the weight of every word I wrote. Words that not only tore apart the silence in that room, but also shattered everything that had existed between us until then. They froze. He turned pale. She put her hands over her mouth as if to stop her stomach from churning. The image they created of me, the passive man, the predictable husband, the fool blinded by love, fell apart right there, in 3 seconds of reading. She stammered something, trying to justify it, but there was no way to unsay what they did. There was no way to erase the weeks of lies, the forced smiles at dinner, the new perfume that she said was from her coworker, the dress she wore again for no reason, the hurried kisses before leaving the house. I knew them too well. And now they knew that I knew. There was no scream. There was no confrontation. Just the deafening silence of the truth being exposed. The kind of truth that changes everything. The kind of silence that brings houses down. That night was the last night she slept in our bed, in our house, in our world. And I got rid of both of us like someone tearing up an old piece of paper that was already worthless. She didn't cry. He didn't say anything. They just sat there, choking on their own shame, waiting for me to react in a predictable way. But I didn't react. I made history. The divorce came quickly, dryly, cleanly. Not because I didn't love her anymore, but because, in that moment, I understood that loving someone who doesn't love you back is like embracing the wind. I gave everything. All. And she exchanged that for some hidden dinners, a cheap motel and messages deleted in the early hours of the morning. She thought I would never find out. That I would never suspect. That I would continue to believe in the same poorly constructed excuses, the same extended hours, the smells of other people's perfume on the car seat. But betrayal, when it enters through the eyes, never leaves the soul. I knew before I even had proof. I felt it. But seeing destroys. For weeks, she was different. More attentive, more affectionate, more present. As if sin made her want to make up for something that even she didn't have the courage to take on. But guilt has a smell. And I felt it in the pillow, in her laughter, in the way she looked away when she hugged me. She was there, but she wasn't there. She smiled, but thought of someone else. She pretended pleasure, but imagined another body. And that was what hurt the most. Knowing that, for weeks, I shared my bed with a cheap soap opera actress. Knowing that every gesture, every touch, was an act. Knowing that I was an audience at my own marriage falling apart. The betrayal wasn't enough. She had the audacity to do this in the space I built with her own hands. In the space where I planned our children. Where I wrote letters that I never delivered. Where I cried for the father I lost and the future I dreamed of with her. And the worst, she took her lover there. Into our sacred. As if that were just a place, and not the cradle of our history. As if my absence justified your presence. As if loving was disposable. The night before the message, I was preparing a surprise. A trip. A fresh start. I believed that everything we were experiencing was just a phase. He was willing to fight, to rebuild. But, at that same moment, she undressed for someone else. Laugh with another. He made pillow promises to someone who didn't even know how to fold a towel properly. And when I discovered everything, when I read the conversations, the photos, the audios, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just wrote. A single message. Direct. Surgical. Destroyer. Every word was a stab at their conscience. Each comma, a sentence. And when he read it, and when she saw the terror in his eyes, when she understood that everything had come crashing down, that's when I felt alive again. They tried to contact. Messages, calls, emails. Requests for forgiveness. 2 beautiful words for such dirty mouths. But I didn't respond. I just disappeared. And from silence my strength was born. My freedom was born from abandonment. But destiny, that one, has a sense of justice. Because after months, she came back. Tried to find me. She tried to take back something that she herself destroyed. And he came back for one reason only, because he knew I followed. That I smiled again. That someone looked at me like she never looked at me again. She discovered that I had rebuilt my days. That someone slept next to me without lies, without excuses, without just one more meeting. And that was when she understood what she lost. She tried. He cried. He begged. He said it was a mistake. A lapse. That he loved me. That you would never stop loving me. That I was the man of her life. But tears don't wash away sins. And words don't erase false nights. I looked her in the eyes and just said, "You made your choice, now live with it." And the cruelest thing, the most devastating thing, is that not even the lover wanted to stay. He discarded it. He exchanged it for another. Someone younger, more whole, more true. She was left alone. Alone with her regrets, with her memories, with the smells that don't return, with the touches that are now memories. Her silence today is greater than any scream. And her absence is the highest price for everything she's done. Because when you lose someone who truly loved you, what remains is an eternity of regret. I loved her. But love is not a hospital to heal a wounded ego. Love is home. And she set ours on fire. But what she doesn't know, what he never imagined, is that message, that simple message sent that night, carried more than words. He carried a plan. A subtle gesture of poetic revenge. Something that changed the course of all of our lives forever. Something that, to this day, she tries to understand. Something that made her look for me, desperate, years later, when she saw my face in a place she never expected to find it. And now she is the one experiencing doubt. Because to this day, she doesn't know how I knew. She doesn't know what else I discovered. She doesn't know what else I hid. And maybe what I did after that message was even more impactful than the betrayal itself. Because every betrayal story has a turning point. The question is, are you ready to find out what mine was? Welcome to the channel. Here, we make it clear, we do not support any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictitious, but they carry a brutal truth. Betrayal destroys homes, breaks trust and changes lives forever. Our goal is to show, without filters, the devastating consequences of selfish choices. Now, take a deep breath. 'Cause you're about to hear a shocking story. At the heart of a life built on patience, there was a man named Daniel. He was a 42-year-old architect, meticulous, calm, someone who believed in solid structures, both in the works he designed and in the relationships he built. He was always proud to have created not just houses, but a home. He was the type of person who preferred silence to confusion, who chose to resolve things through dialogue before getting excited. From an early age, he learned from his father that loving was an act of persistence, of maintaining oneself even when everything around him seemed to be falling apart. Daniel carried this philosophy into everything he did. And it was with this spirit that he built his marriage with Helena. Helena, on the other hand, was 38 years old and had a restless soul. She was a literature teacher at a renowned school and passionate about words. I saw meaning between the lines, I read behaviors with the sensitivity of someone who studies characters by profession. He had a light smile and a presence that calmed the environments he passed through. But, unlike Daniel, Helena lived in search of intensity. Everything about her was emotion, instinct, feeling, and perhaps that was what made the two so complementary. While he drew the boundaries, she filled them in with color. While he structured, she created movement. For years, they seemed to work fine that way. They met at an independent film festival, in a forgotten session on a late Sunday afternoon. Daniel was there alone, running away from the crowds, while Helena laughed loudly at a silent scene, causing him to turn around and notice her. They started talking after the final credits, as if they already knew each other from other lives. It was the beginning of a story that, in those early years, seemed made to last. They bought a modest house in a leafy neighborhood, surrounded by old families and streets where children still played at dusk. Daniel renovated the place with his own hands, taking care of every detail, transforming that space into something that reflected the care he felt for her. Helena chose the curtains, the paintings, the books on the shelf. They divided spaces and created new ones, not just physical, but emotional as well. In the early years, the marriage was light. They shared wine on Fridays, laughed together at old movies, discussed books, and even disagreed in a healthy way. Helena loved the way Daniel listened to her attentively even when she talked about topics he didn't understand. And he, in turn, felt welcomed by the way she made even silence seem poetic. They had a son, Lucas, who at the age of 7 already showed traces of his mother's sensitivity and his father's rationality. He was a sweet boy, who liked to build models with his father and read stories before bed with his mother. The house seemed alive, pulsating, full of silent promises. Daniel worked in his own office, not far away. A small space, with a pleasant view, where I spent hours on drawing boards and screens, always seeking a balance between the functional and the beautiful. Helena taught classes in the morning and, in the afternoon, she often dedicated herself to correcting tests and preparing classes at home. From time to time, I gave workshops at cultural centers, literary events, or was invited to small lectures in other cities. Nothing that would compromise his constant presence in the family's routine. Helena was seen as an admirable woman by everyone around her, attentive, charismatic, intelligent. She cultivated friends like someone who cultivates flowers, with presence and care. And Daniel respected that space of hers, even though, at times, he felt that there was a part of Helena that he could never fully reach. As the years went by, life, as happens with everyone, gained other layers. Daniel became more introspective, more focused on the growth of the office, which was now beginning to attract larger projects. He spent more time outside the house, not out of lack of interest, but out of necessity. After all, they were renovating the attic of the house to transform it into a library for Helena and a small painting studio for Lucas. He wanted to provide comfort, he wanted them to have what they never had. Helena, although understanding, began to miss the times when he spent more time looking at her than on the projects. Despite this, there were no fights. There was an unspoken respect, a solid foundation. Helena continued to be present, creative, loving with Lucas and Daniel's companion in nighttime conversations, although quieter, more emotionally distant, as if her thoughts were occupying another space that was no longer that home. And Daniel, although he noticed these small absences, preferred to believe that it was just the tiredness of the routine, that they would soon have time for themselves, that things would soon return to pulsating with the same intensity as before. He was a man of faith in everything he built, and Helena was, for him, his greatest construction. Some weekends started to be filled with social events that Daniel no longer felt so comfortable attending. Helena went alone. She said it was just a meeting with friends, or a school event, or a lecture that was worth it. He returned late, sometimes bringing new books, sometimes with a distant look. Daniel, even though he noticed these changes, avoided confrontation. I believed that pressing would be the same as ruining it. He always preferred dialogue to confrontation, gestures to shouting. I continued buying the flowers she liked, preparing coffee on Sundays, taking care of the garden where she planted lavender. But something inside him was beginning to ache silently, a slowly growing intuition, like a crack in glass, too small to be alarming but impossible to ignore. Helena, on the other hand, was going through an internal turmoil that not even she could name clearly. She felt alive in classes, fulfilled with Lucas, but restless when alone. It was as if something was being lost in her over the years, a feeling of being seen only as a wife and mother, and no longer as a woman. It wasn't Daniel's fault. It wasn't a lack of love. It was a confusing feeling, as if I were sinking into an all-too-calm sea. The conversations between them still existed, but they no longer had the same depth. They slept together, but the touch was no longer the same. The goodnight kiss had become mechanical, almost polite. And that left her empty. The nights were filled with reading, sometimes with writings that she never showed to anyone. On some diary pages, I wrote about a woman who at first, it was just a subtle change. Nothing Daniel could point to directly. Little things, like the way Helena took longer to respond to messages during the day, or the eyes that seemed to wander when he talked about the new cultural center project. She smiled, nodded, but he felt like her attention was always a few seconds behind. At first, he attributed it all to tiredness. The new semester had started and she had more classes than usual. He often commented on the emotional burden of dealing with adolescence in the process of maturing, the dramas that unfolded in the classroom, the intense texts that he diligently corrected. Daniel believed. He always believed. It was in his nature to trust, to give space, to understand. And for a while, that was enough. But gestures began to speak more than words. She, who was always enthusiastic about wine nights and old movies with him, started saying that she preferred to go to bed early. Fridays, once sacred to the couple, were now filled with pedagogical meetings, impromptu get-togethers with coworkers or, simply, an insurmountable tiredness that made her lie down in the dark room while he was still washing the dinner dishes. Daniel watched, in silence, as these small distances took shape. I tried not to think too much. Maybe it was a phase. All couples go through ups and downs. But deep down, something was increasingly bothering him. It was as if there was a song playing in a room in the house that he couldn't find. The turning point began with a seemingly banal event. One Saturday morning, Helena left her cell phone on the table while they were drinking coffee, and got up to answer the intercom. Daniel, distracted, heard the sound of a notification. The name that appeared on the screen was unknown to him, but the message was brief, objective and marked by a tone too intimate to be confused with professionalism. He didn't read everything. It didn't even need to. Enough to make your stomach turn. When she returned to the table, smiling, bringing orders from the organic fare, Daniel just watched in silence. I didn't say anything. He saved the moment, like someone carefully folding a letter that shouldn't have been read. He wasn't the impulsive type of man. I needed to understand more, know where this went, whether it was just a misunderstanding or something deeper. But from that moment on, something inside him broke. He started to notice details. The different perfumes she started using, claiming to have received it as a gift from a student. The clothes chosen with more care, even to go to the market. The spontaneous smiles while typing on the cell phone, lying on the couch. The nights when he said he would need to work late at school, but returned home with a lightness that didn't match someone who spent hours in front of tests and reports. Daniel didn't confront her. He preferred silence, but not inertia. He began to reorganize his own steps. He got in touch with an old colleague from college who now worked in forensic technology. He asked for help, his voice breaking, but with the firmness of someone who knew he needed answers. In a few weeks, he had access to records that confirmed what his heart had been screaming for a long time. The conversations, the scheduled meetings, the meticulously planned excuses. But even with all the evidence, Daniel did not react as many would imagine. He didn't scream, he didn't destroy things, he didn't cry in public. He just started to observe his house with different eyes. Every corner, every object, was now analyzed through the lens of lies. The chair where she sat to correct tests, the sheet changed more frequently, the book forgotten on the sofa. Everything seemed to bear the mark of the presence of someone who wasn't him. And yet, he treated her with respect. I prepared breakfast, left flowers on the kitchen counter, wrote loving notes. Not because he was still deluded, but because there was something more at stake. A plan forming in silence. A response that required calm, intelligence and precision. Helena, on the other hand, began to subtly change as well. She seemed more distant, but at the same time more careful. As if she wanted to make up for something that even she couldn't name. She made a point of asking him how his day was, of listening to his stories, of lying on his chest like she did in the first years of their marriage. And Daniel allowed it. It allowed gestures, touches, kisses. I allowed it, but I didn't forget it. He guarded every word, every movement, like someone writing a secret diary. There were nights when I went out for a run alone, just to clear my mind, but I always ended up coming back with the most tumultuous thoughts. It was an emotional maze. Loving someone who hurt you, but who was still there, smiling, cooking, living by your side. Anger mixed with longing. The contempt, the memory of a time when everything seemed right. It was on a Sunday that Daniel made the final decision. One random, sunny Sunday, she proposed a picnic in the park. Something they hadn't done in years. He accepted, smiled, prepared the basket, organized everything perfectly. On that cold September morning, the sky seemed to carry the exact weight of the atmosphere inside the house. Helena had moved out weeks ago, but she still came to pick up some things that were left in her old room, now without the smell of lavender, without the sheets she had folded, without the poetry book stacked next to the bed. Daniel was in the studio when he heard the car stop. He didn't move immediately. His throat felt dry, as if her mere presence still caused physical reactions in his body. Time had passed, but certain memories still caused sweaty palms. He got up slowly, as if preparing his spirit for an inevitable encounter, and walked to the kitchen. She entered through the front door as if she didn't want to disturb, saying in an almost whispered voice that she would only take the paintings and some boxes that were in the closet. Daniel nodded, saying nothing, just watching every movement. The way he avoided his eyes, the way he forced a polite smile, as if every object now carried the weight of shame. Helena was thinner. Deeper eyes. There was a tension in his face that hadn't been there before. He carried with him not only guilt, but something that Daniel still couldn't name. When she picked up the last box, she stood for a few seconds in front of the shelf. There was an old photograph there, forgotten by him, where the two were smiling in front of the sea. She lightly touched the frame, and her voice was low, almost choked, saying that she never thought it would all end that way. Daniel took a deep breath, and just said that sometimes the end comes exactly as it needs to. She lowered her head, her eyes filled, but she maintained control. He said he had something to tell. That I could no longer live with that trapped inside my chest. Daniel leaned back on the counter and waited, in silence. But what she revealed was not what he expected to hear. She said that the last few days she had been dreaming about him. With Daniel. Not with her lover. He said he dreamed of breakfast, of simple trips, of lazy Sundays watching movies. He said he discovered, too late, that what he had with him was real, and that he confused comfort with monotony. But that wasn't what was eating her up. What kept her up at night, what made her cry in the shower, was not knowing how he had discovered everything. How he knew exactly when and where she would be. How he wrote that precise, destructive message that imploded his life in 3 lines. Daniel kept his gaze fixed, his arms crossed. I just said that sometimes love awakens intelligence that anger never reaches. She laughed, a sad, almost childish laugh, and said that she really needed to know. That he had the impression that there was more to this story than he let on. He looked at the clock, walked to the drawer and took out an envelope. He handed it to her without saying anything. Helena hesitated before opening it. The hands shook slightly. When he slid his finger under the seal and removed the contents, his eyes widened. There was a letter there. But not from Daniel. It was from the person she least imagined. The letter was typed, with sharp and direct words. It was from Thomas. Daniel's brother. Helena read in silence, her eyes scanning each line as if they were blades. And little by little, her expression changed. Confusion, disbelief, anger, sadness, shame. They were all there, parading across his face like a cruel parade of emotions impossible to contain. Daniel didn't say anything. He let her finish. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet and furious. Thomas. Daniel's younger brother. Her childhood friend too. He was present at so many important moments in the couple's lives, who dined with them on special dates, who was best man at their wedding and a constant figure at family parties. Thomas was always more impulsive, more seductive, more free. And Helena, at the height of her internal crisis, her lack of affection, her silent questions, ended up finding an escape in him. But what she never knew, was that Thomas always had a hidden interest. A kind of unresolved admiration for everything Daniel had. For the stable life, for the balanced marriage, for the respect he generated in others. And maybe, on some level, having Helena was less about passion and more about possession. But what Thomas didn't expect either, was to truly fall in love with her. In the letter, Thomas confessed everything. Not only the involvement, but also the guilt. And more than that, he said that he was the one who revealed everything to Daniel. He did it because he could no longer live with the remorse, and because, even though he had gotten involved with his brother's wife, he still saw Daniel as someone much bigger than himself. He said that Daniel deserved the truth, even if it came in the worst way. He said he tried to get away from Helena, but she always came back. That they both knew they were wrong, but that there was a connection between them that they couldn't even explain. And in the end, he asked for forgiveness. But not just Daniel. He asked Helena for forgiveness. For dragging her into a hole with no way out. For having confused desire with love. For having nurtured a relationship based on lies. Helena threw the letter on the table, breathing heavily. He asked why he hadn't said it before. Why did he let her remain in doubt, in ruins, trying to find some logic in such a sudden outcome? Daniel, with steady eyes, replied that he needed her to feel. Let him experience emptiness. That he looked back without understanding. Let him feel the bitter taste of doubt, as he felt so many nights. He said that forgiveness was something he still didn't know if he had, but that emotional justice had been done. And now, with everything exposed, she could move on with her life without any more lies. Helena tried to formulate some response, but no words seemed enough. She then said she needed to see Thomas. That I needed to understand. Daniel just said that he had left the country. That after delivering the letter, he disappeared. Nobody else knew about him. As if he had left a bomb on the ground and disappeared before the explosion. Helena fell into the chair, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. She said she didn't know what was worse, having lost her husband, or having discovered that she was just another piece in the game of someone who envied everything around her. Daniel didn't respond. He stood firm, looking at the woman he once loved as if looking at a work that had collapsed and could no longer be rebuilt. At that moment, she apologized. Not with memorized words, but with a choked, almost childish voice. He said he regretted it. I would give anything to go back in time. Daniel smiled. A short, tired smile, and he said it was no longer about coming back. It was about following. And that he was already doing it. Helena got up, picked up the missing box, and before leaving, she looked back one last time. In his eyes, she saw something she couldn't name. Maybe it was freedom. Maybe it was sadness. Maybe it was both. As she disappeared through the door, Daniel returned to the studio. There was a new project on the drawing board. A hanging garden, full of life, carefully planned. And there, between squares and papers, he allowed himself to close his eyes for a few seconds. Take a deep breath. Feeling the lightness of someone who no longer carries the weight of others. He knew that what had happened between her and her brother was unforgivable, but he also understood that carrying this pain any longer would be the true poison. He chose not to forget, but to transform. Because even the deepest ruins can serve as the basis for a new foundation. And maybe, just maybe, that was his greatest revenge. Live well. Better than before. More whole. More true. Without needing to destroy, without needing to take revenge with fire. only with reconstruction. But the past, as always, still had one more surprise in store. A loose piece that no one knew where to fit. And this one was about to appear. 2 months after the last meeting between Daniel and Helena, spring arrived bringing a new air to the city. The trees that lined the neighborhood were full of young leaves and flowers that bloomed without asking for permission, as if nature itself insisted on reminding us that new beginnings are possible. Daniel, now immersed in a project that involved rebuilding a school destroyed by a flood in another region, kept his days filled with deadlines, technical visits, and calculations. The busy mind was his way of not returning to the dark corners of his memory. But, even amid the hectic pace, the absence of something was still present. It was no longer Helena's absence, but an answer that still throbbed like an open wound. Not about the betrayal itself, but about Thomas's sudden disappearance. That silent disappearance, without traces, without subsequent letters, without return. It was as if he had never existed. It was on a Friday morning that everything took an unexpected turn. Daniel was leaving a meeting when he received a call from an unknown number. He answered without thinking, still with his head on the reports, but the voice on the other end made his heart freeze. It was Thomas. The voice was hoarse, deeper, but unmistakable. He said he was back in the city for a few days, staying in a hotel downtown, and that he needed to see him. He said there was something Daniel needed to know, something that wasn't in the letter. At first he hesitated. Part of him wanted to hang up the phone and pretend that nothing had happened, that the past was buried. But another part, the one that still sought to understand why, convinced him to accept. He scheduled the meeting for that same night, in a discreet restaurant. The atmosphere was elegant but sober. Spaced tables, low lighting, instrumental music. Daniel arrived first, ordered wine and waited. Thomas appeared 15 minutes later, thinner, with his face marked by sleepless nights. He wore simple but clean clothes, and there was a tiredness in his eyes that went beyond the physical. When he sat down in front of Daniel, there was an initial silence that lasted longer than was acceptable. Neither of them knew how to start. It was Thomas who broke the ice, saying that he didn't expect forgiveness or compassion, but that he was carrying a weight that he could no longer hold. He said the letter left out only part of the truth. An outburst, yes, but also an attempt to alleviate one's own guilt. What he didn't tell, was the real reason behind everything. He said it wasn't just envy or neediness. It wasn't just the desire for something that didn't belong to him. There was something more. Something that completely changed the meaning of everything. Daniel frowned, leaning forward, waiting for the revelation. Thomas pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. He opened it slowly and placed it on the table. Inside, there was a ring. A loner. With a discreet but shiny stone. And next to it, an old, yellowed photo of a young woman with eyes identical to Daniel's. Thomas didn't need to say much. The truth was there. He was the son of another father. The man Daniel knew as his father was not the same man who fathered Thomas. They were raised as brothers, but never really were. Their mother kept this a secret their entire lives. Only after her death, Thomas found saved letters, hidden documents, and a last message where she confessed everything. Daniel's father figure, the man he always admired, who he always sought to imitate, had had an affair. A long, hidden affair. And from this betrayal Thomas was born. When he found out, his world collapsed. He began to see everything with different eyes. The house, family lunches, father's advice. It all sounded like a farce. And it was in this state of disorientation that he approached Helena. At first, out of impulse, out of rebellion. Then, for the confusion. And later, out of despair. He said that Helena, with her own pain and doubts, seemed to understand something that no one else could. But everything got out of control. Desire became attachment, attachment became chaos, and chaos destroyed everything. Daniel was silent. The revelation was an avalanche. Everything he believed he knew about his origins, his family, his history, was now in tatters. The man who raised him, who taught him to be honest, had lied for decades. Thomas, the brother he had protected, was now also the reflection of a much bigger lie. Helena, in this new context, stopped being just an unfaithful woman, and became part of an even more complex web. He picked up the ring, twirled it between his fingers, watching how something so small could carry so much weight. He asked Thomas why he had kept it for so long. "Why didn't you tell him from the beginning?" Thomas, teary-eyed, said he thought the truth would only increase the pain. But after being away for so long, he understood that silence is also a form of cowardice. The waiter approached to collect the dishes, and the two fell silent. The world around followed its rhythm, oblivious to what was happening at that table. When they were alone again, Daniel finally spoke. He said he still didn't know what to do with that information. That part of him felt angry, another part felt sorry. But most just felt tired. Tired of so many lies. Tired of so many delayed truths. He said it was not possible to erase the past, but that he could choose how he would deal with it from now on. Thomas lowered his head, nodded, and stood up. He said that would be his last appearance. That I no longer expected to be part of his life. That he just wanted Daniel to know the truth. He left the bill paid, took one last look, and left through the glass door as if closing a chapter with a full stop. In the days that followed, Daniel remained introspective. He didn't mention it to anyone. Not even with my closest friends. He just went back to work, walking around the city in silence, trying to reorganize his story with the pieces he had left. It was like rebuilding a model that was destroyed by rain. The structures were there, but it was necessary to decide what was worth reusing. One Sunday afternoon, he decided to visit his parents' grave. He took white flowers, sat next to the tombstone and remained there, for long hours, in silence. As if talking to someone who never existed. He asked in a low voice if it had all been a lie. If he was ever really that man's son. He received no response, but the silent tears that fell on the cold stone were enough to alleviate some of the anguish. The following week, Helena appeared again. But not to ask for forgiveness. Not to try to get back together. He came to bring a letter he received in the mail, sent by Thomas before leaving the country. She thought Daniel should read it. He said he didn't know the contents, that he hadn't opened it. He just handed over the envelope and said that this was finally the last time he would step foot in that house. He thanked her, without expressing emotion. After she left, he sat on the living room sofa, with the closed envelope between his fingers. He took a deep breath and opened it. In the letter, Thomas said he knew Daniel would move on. That it wasn't necessary for them to be brothers for him to have learned from him what it was to be a man. That, even though he had made a mistake, he recognized the value of being raised alongside someone like him. He said that maybe one day he would return, but that he didn't count on it. And he left a request, that Daniel not let that revelation destroy his father's memory. Because, despite the mistake, the man had raised 2 children. And that, he said, could not be erased. Daniel folded the letter and put it inside a book. Then he got up, opened the windows of the house and let in the new air. There was a space in his chest that was no longer one of pain, but of understanding. I now knew that the truth does not always save. Sometimes it just releases. And, in that freedom, I could finally start over. No regrets, no lies, no burdens. Only with the lightness of someone who survived everything, and still chose to continue. After reading the last letter, Daniel spent days in such profound silence that the walls of the house seemed to absorb his presence with reverence. The world outside continued to spin, cars passing by, children playing on the sidewalks, birds crossing the sky in scattered flocks, but inside everything was suspended, as if time had slowed down to allow him to reorganize his emotions. The revelation of his recent past had not just peeled back a wound, but completely reconfigured the emotional architecture upon which he had built his life. The feeling was no longer one of betrayal or anger, but of displacement. It was like waking up one day and discovering that the house he had lived in all his life had changed while he was sleeping. Even good memories were now under suspicion, as if it was necessary to relive them with new eyes to know if they were in fact real or just the result of the narrative that you so wanted to believe. At work, the body remained functional. I designed, answered emails, solved problems. But his mind wandered in paths that escaped logic. He wondered where the limits were between forgiving and deluding himself, between moving forward and running away from the pain. The looks that he previously interpreted as admiration now seemed weighed down with curiosity, as if everyone knew, as if everyone had seen the movie of his life while he was still in the middle of the story. He didn't want compassion, nor justifications. He just wanted to understand where he lost control, when exactly he stopped seeing the cracks that were before his eyes. But perhaps the most painful thing would be to recognize that there was never control, that no one is really safe from the truths they believe they carry. Over time, the nights became less dense again. Sleep was still fragmented, but dreams had ceased. The nightmares that previously invaded his mind with distorted images of Helena and Thomas now gave way to a peaceful emptiness, as if his psyche had finally accepted that certain answers would never come. He started running in the park again, something he did before everything happened. Not for health or routine, but for the pleasure of feeling the body in movement, of experiencing a minimal sensation of physical progress when everything else seemed stagnant. One day, at the end of a run, he sat on a bench near the lake and watched an elderly couple walking hand in hand. There was no rush in the steps, no words exchanged, just the calm presence of someone who knows the weight and value of time. That image brought an unexpected pang to his chest. Not out of envy, but out of longing for something that has not yet been experienced. It was in this state of introspection that an unusual invitation arrived. An old university friend, Clara, with whom he had lost contact years ago, met him by chance at an architecture conference. She had become coordinator of a reconstruction project in a region affected by landslides and needed an architect with social sensitivity. The reunion was light, unpretentious. They talked for hours like old acquaintances, without touching on personal matters, as if time had merely paused rather than pushed them apart. Daniel was interested in the project, not only because of the technical challenge, but because of the opportunity to physically and emotionally move away from the scenario that marked him so much. He accepted the invitation without hesitation. Moving to the new city brought a different routine. The community was smaller, warmer. People still greeted each other kindly and showed genuine interest in each other. Daniel rented a simple wooden house, close to the construction site. In his spare time, he helped organize training workshops with residents, teaching techniques for using space, sustainability, and rebuilding interiors with local materials. He felt useful in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. And, in this process, Clara became a constant presence. They had lunch together, discussed projects, laughed about daily challenges. She was spontaneous, practical, but also deeply empathetic. He never asked questions about his past. I just respected the silences, spaces and rhythms he imposed. As the weeks passed, a silent connection formed between the two. There was no urgency, no rush. Just company. Small gestures like soup left at the door on rainy days or a note with a favorite quote left on the desk at work. And Daniel, who thought his heart had closed forever, began to notice small signs that life was, little by little, coming back to life. It was a good strangeness, as if waking up from a deep sleep and seeing the morning light coming through the window for the first time. One night, as they walked home from a community event, Clara talked about the feeling of rebuilding herself in silence. He said that he had also been through something difficult, that life had cruel ways of bending us, but that the most beautiful thing was discovering that we were still capable of loving again. Daniel listened in silence, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled effortlessly. But the peace that was beginning to take shape was, once again, challenged. Returning home one rainy night, he found an envelope under the door. He recognized the handwriting right away. It was Helena's. Inside was a long, handwritten letter. She said she had started therapy. who understood that his search for intensity actually hid a huge fear of feeling invisible. She said that she was trying to rebuild her relationship with her own mother, who had also betrayed her father years ago, and that there were emotional patterns that were repeating themselves without her being aware. He said he wasn't writing to ask for another chance, but to say thank you. For everything they experienced, for the respectful silence, for the letter that woke her up to reality. And, in the end, she wrote something that Daniel never expected to read. She said that she was happy to know, from mutual friends, that he was okay, and that she hoped he had found someone who knew how to see him with the clarity that she never had the maturity to offer. Daniel folded the letter and put it in a box. There was no anger. Not sadness. Just the certainty that that story had finally come to an end. A story that began with promises, was crossed by lies, exploded with revelations and ended with mutual acceptance. A human story. Made of mistakes, wrong choices, irreparable pain. But also made of reconstructions. He knew he would never forget everything he went through. But I also knew I didn't need to carry it around like an anchor. That was part of what made him who he was now. A more lucid, firmer, more self-aware man. Days later, during a simple ceremony to celebrate the completion of the first stage of construction, Clara pulled him by the hand towards the school's small balcony. There were lanterns hanging, children running, parents smiling. It was a scene that emanated life in its raw state. She said that if he wanted to stay longer, there would be room for him there. Not as an architect. But as a man. As a companion. Daniel didn't respond right away. He observed the landscape in front of him. He thought about everything he experienced. And then he just held her hand more firmly. In that gesture, there was everything that needed to be said. But far away, in the rubble of the past, something was still moving. A piece that no one had realized was still loose. And that, even buried under so many layers of pain, it was about to emerge. Not to destroy. But to reveal. Because the end hadn't come yet. The rain from the night before still left the ground damp when Daniel woke up that Saturday, with the first rays of sunlight filtering through the cracks in the window. The wooden house breathed silence, but not a heavy silence like that of long ago. It was a light, serene silence, like that which precedes a new season. He stretched slowly, got up and went to the kitchen to make coffee. The aroma filled the room as the kettle whistled, and for a moment he allowed his mind to wander. She thought of Helena's letter, which was kept in the box next to the forgotten memories, and felt a strange mix of gratitude and distance. Her voice, now just ink on paper, no longer carried the same weight. It was like remembering a film that once moved people, but that, when rewatched now, no longer had the same impact. Clara still slept in the guest room. She had been staying there for the last few days due to renovations at her house, and their coexistence was natural, made up of simple gestures, like sharing the same space without needing to justify silences or share all the pain. That morning, they decided to visit a nearby village where there would be a small cultural fair. They took the country road, surrounded by tall trees and newly planted fields. During the journey, they talked about the future of the school they were rebuilding, but also about their childhoods, their first frustrations, and even about the flavors they hated. Clara said that she was afraid of forgetting who she was if she stayed silent for too long, and Daniel confessed that, for a long time, he tried not to feel anything so as not to fall apart. There was an honesty between them that didn't need to be rehearsed. It was raw, sincere, and for that very reason, liberating. When they arrived at the fair, Clara went straight to the antique book stand, and Daniel walked alone to a craft stall where a lady was selling necklaces made from local stones. As he looked at the pieces, he felt a hand lightly touch his shoulder. As he turned around, he was surprised by a face he hadn't seen in years, Isabella, Thomas's ex-girlfriend, someone who, in another time, had almost become part of the family. The meeting was unexpected and filled with subtle tension. Isabella was more mature, with discreet wrinkles in the corners of her eyes and a hesitant smile. He said he lived around there, that he had moved after his troubled breakup with Thomas and that he now ran a small sewing studio. Daniel, a little disconcerted, asked if she knew what had happened to him, and she replied no, that she never heard anything again. But before they said goodbye, she said she needed to deliver something. She took a small envelope from her bag, folded several times, and said that Thomas had left it with her before he left, a kind of confession that should be delivered, in case one day Daniel shows up there. His heart raced. Clara approached at the exact moment Isabella handed over the envelope and noticed from his expression that something was out of the ordinary. Without asking questions, he just discreetly held your hand as they walked back to the car. Back at the house, Daniel waited until he was alone to open it. He sat on the edge of the bed, took a deep breath and unfolded the paper. The content was short, but each line seemed chosen with a scalpel. Thomas said that, before leaving, he discovered something that changed the meaning of the previous letter. It revealed that Helena, in the last months of her marriage, had discovered the truth about his origins, that he was not the son of the same father. And even so, she continued her relationship with him, in secret, as if that revelation increased the excitement of the forbidden even more. Thomas said it destroyed him inside. He felt used, manipulated. Not because she knew the truth, but because she kept quiet, because she turned the mistake into a game. He said he thought about telling everything first, but was afraid of completely destroying the bond between the two. That he didn't have the courage to face what he really felt. And then, it disappeared. Daniel felt the impact like a hammer in the chest. The pieces fit together with an almost poetic cruelty. The betrayal was not just carnal or emotional. It was an experiment in power, control, perversity. The woman he once loved with the greatest purity had used his brother, or almost brother, as an extension of his own wounded ego. It wasn't just infidelity. It was emotional perversion. A labyrinth built with half-truths, disguised as romance. He closed his eyes and remembered the last hug he gave Helena. He remembered the nights when she cried on his shoulders saying she felt lost. He remembered the moments when he thought he could save her. Now I realized that it was never a question of salvation. She didn't want to be saved. I wanted to destroy. Maybe because I don't know how to build it myself. When Clara returned, she found Daniel sitting on the porch, the paper in his hands and his gaze distant. She approached him slowly and asked if he wanted to talk. He hesitated, but handed over the paper. He said that, after so long, he believed that nothing could surprise him anymore. And even so, it was wrong. Clara read in silence. When he finished, he looked at him with an expression between compassion and astonishment. He said that certain truths arrive late, but they still come to liberate. That now, he no longer owed anyone anything. That I was finally free, not because I had overcome it, but because I understood it. Daniel shook his head slowly. He said that maybe freedom was just that, knowing and choosing not to carry anymore. In the following days, he wrote a letter. Not to send, but to record. A kind of emotional testament. He told everything that had happened, from the first signs of Helena's separation, through the betrayal, the revelations about Thomas, until the moment when Isabella's letter reached his hands. He spared no details. It was raw, direct, painful. But there was also beauty in the way he narrated his own reconstruction. In the end, he wrote something that he had been keeping for months without having the courage to say out loud, I'm not the same man. But I'm more whole. And if I'm going to love again, let it be lightly. Because pain, I've already known it up close. He printed it, folded it and put it in the bottom of the drawer where he kept his unfinished projects. It wasn't for anyone. It was for himself. For the Daniel of the future, in case he ever forgot how much he had survived. One afternoon, while visiting the new stage of the school under construction, a child approached and handed over a drawing made with colored pencils. It was a portrait of him, with an engineer's helmet and a wide smile. In the bottom corner, in crooked letters, the phrase, "This young man is the one who builds hope." Daniel held the paper for long seconds, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like crying. Not because of past pain, but because of the confirmation that, even among ruins, it was possible to plant something good. That night, Clara prepared a simple dinner. Rice, lentils and roasted vegetables. They sat at the table in silence, as was their custom on the most intense days. Halfway through the meal, Daniel looked up and said he needed to tell her something. He told about Thomas's letter, about its content, about its impact. Clara listened to him attentively, without interrupting. When he finished, she didn't say everything was fine. He didn't try to minimize it. He just got up, sat next to him and rested his head on his shoulder. He said it was time to build a new story. And that, if he wanted, she would like to be part of it. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He held her hand tightly, as if holding a promise. The world outside continued to spin. But there, in that wooden house, in that silent embrace, a new life was already being designed. And this time, there would be no more shadows behind the doors. Just the beautiful risk of what was yet to come. Because some scars, even invisible ones, carry the exact map of where you can start over. And he was ready. For the first time, completely ready. The months passed with an almost imperceptible speed, and what previously seemed like a life paralyzed by memories turned into a scene of continuous movement. Daniel was no longer a man of delayed promises. The wooden house he rented, once simple and functional, was little by little shaped into a home. The spaces gained personality, the walls were filled with new paintings, and the kitchen table became the center for light meetings, with spontaneous laughter and conversations that no longer carried the weight of the past. Clara's presence there was neither imposed nor declared, it just happened. She came and went, but with a constancy that didn't need a label, and with a sweetness that made him breathe more calmly. Daniel had understood that love, when true, does not charge, does not invade, it just exists and remains. The reconstruction of the school reached the final stage, and the inauguration was scheduled for the following month. It would be a symbolic event, with the presence of residents, teachers, and local authorities. Daniel was invited to speak, but he hesitated. He never liked microphones or spotlights, but he knew that moment was not just about cement and wood. It was about what had been rebuilt inside him as well. The week of the opening, he received an unexpected call. Helena. The voice on the other end of the line was different. There was no plea, no justification, just a request to meet. He said he didn't want to reopen wounds, or ask for anything, but that he needed to talk in person. He pondered. Part of him thought there was nothing more to be said. But another part, the quieter and perhaps wiser part, understood that certain cycles only truly end when they are looked into the eyes. They arranged to meet at a discreet café, away from the center. When he arrived, she was already there. More aged, more discreet, with the tired eyes of someone who has faced storms that cannot be seen from the outside. Helena said little. She said she had quit her job, moved to another city, cut ties with everything that kept her stuck in that old version of herself. She said that she had severe anxiety attacks, that she spent months unable to sleep and that, for the first time, she faced her choices head-on. He didn't defend himself, he didn't try to justify anything. I just said I was sorry. And that, despite everything, she wanted him to know that she truly loved him. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He observed the woman in front of him and, for a moment, had difficulty associating her with the image of betrayal, with the anguish of the days that came after. Time had done its work. He looked into her eyes and said that he believed that love existed, yes, but that sometimes love is not enough to hold everything we carry. He said he didn't hate her anymore. Who did not wish evil? But she was now part of a chapter that had already closed. And that he was finally at peace. Helena smiled with moist eyes, thanked him and left. They did not exchange contacts. There was no promise of a reunion. Just the silence worthy of two strangers who once were everything to each other. On opening day, the sky was clear, and the community's children filled the hallways of the new school with screams, laughter and running. Daniel watched everything with a feeling he couldn't describe. When he took the stage, the microphone in front of him was shaking in his hand. He took a deep breath and spoke, not as an architect, but as someone who survived. He said that the most solid constructions are not always born from the most stable foundations. Sometimes, it is from what falls apart that the most human spaces are born. That losses, no matter how devastating they are, can open paths to versions of ourselves that we would never know if everything had remained in place. He received intense applause. But it wasn't the sound of the clapping that remained in his memory. It was the look of Clara, standing on the edge of the stage, with discreet tears in her eyes and a smile that said more than 1,000 words. Thomas never heard from him again. No letter, no message. It was as if he had disappeared from the map, as if guilt had pushed him into voluntary exile. But Daniel knew that the lack of response was also a response. Somewhere, perhaps he was trying to fix what couldn't be undone. Maybe he was just trying to survive with himself. Helena, in turn, wrote a book months later. An autofiction. She told, in disguised words, the story of a love that she destroyed with her own hands. The book was not successful. But it circulated among some attentive readers who recognized the fragility of someone who, for fear of disappearing, destroyed everything around him. It was a painful but necessary book. And, in some way, an attempt to redeem himself with the world. Clara followed alongside Daniel. They never labeled what they lived, never made official dates or made formal promises. But they were together. Lightly, with respect, with a complicity that did not require proof. She accompanied him on social projects, and he helped her renovate the studio she opened in the city. They divided their days without rushing, without pressure. Like two survivors who found shelter in each other. And there, in that unlikely scenario, Daniel discovered something he never thought he would feel again: happiness. Not the passing euphoria, but that silent peace of someone who knows they are exactly where they should be. One night, Clara prepared a special dinner. There was no commemorative date or specific reason. Just the desire to celebrate life. They sat at the table, toasted with simple wine and, amid laughter and memories, Daniel held her hand and said he was ready. She didn't understand right away, and he added that he wanted to build a new house. Together. That it wasn't about getting married, nor about documents, but about creating a space where everything could be a fresh start. She smiled, excited, and said she was ready too. That was it. A new project. But now, no hiding places, no locked rooms, no secrets buried beneath the floor. And so, between the end of the wounds and the beginning of a new story, Daniel found his closure. Not the end of pain, but its transformation. Not revenge, but reconstruction. He understood that not all stories end with forgiveness. But they can all end with liberation. And that truly living is having the courage to start again, even when everything seems lost. If you've made it this far, tell us, what did you think of this story? What was the part that marked you the most? Your opinion is very important to us. Take advantage and subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this. And remember, this channel does not support any type of betrayal. Our commitment is to stories that show the naked truth and with the intensity that life demands. Until next time.